All right, guys. Today we will be completing lesson 3 in our first math booklet. This lesson is called Place Value. For this lesson, you will need, as usual, our current lesson page that you can see. The page after this is lesson 3, Place Value Sheet. This will be your homework for today. And there is one reference page in the back of your binder that is very important for today's lesson. It looks like this, the place value chart. I am going to ask that you take this out of your binder and have it next to you while you are working on the lesson and the homework, and then put it back in your binder where it was afterwards. This is a very useful tool. And if you run out of space on this page, I have already printed off extras, so you can come and grab more from me if need be. So let's get started. In this lesson, we are going to talk about rounding again. So I've already taught you how to round. We don't need to spend too much time on that. However, the questions are going to look slightly different. In lesson 1, I asked you questions like round to the nearest dollar or round to the nearest cent. In this lesson, I will be asking you harder questions like round to the nearest hundred or round to the nearest tenth. So the first thing that we need to talk about is what these words mean. Now, when I write out a number, such as this giant number that's on our screen, right here, each digit has a different place value. Now, if I was to say this number as a whole, I would say that it is 1,234,567 and 89 hundredths. Each of these digits has its own place value. The 1 is in the millions place, the 2 is in the hundred thousands, the 3 is in the 10,000s, the 4 is in the thousands, the 5 is in the hundreds, the 6 is in the tens, the 7 is the ones, the 8 is the tenths, and the 9 is the hundredths. Now, although you need to know all of these place values, you do not need to memorize them. That is where our reference sheet comes in. For example, if I was to ask you to round this number to the nearest hundreds, not hundredths, but hundreds, I would be talking about rounding this 5. So, let's get started and I'll show you what I mean. Lesson 3, place value. Working with money, we talk about rounding to cents, which gives us 2 decimal places, or dollars, where we round to the ones. But there are plenty of other place values, as we just talked about, that you can work with or round to as well. You can always reference this image to the right that outlines each of our place values. Let's start with an example. Round the following numbers to the nearest hundred. Now, please be careful. As I said earlier, there is a difference between hundred and hundredth. Whoops. Hundredth is spelt like this, and it is talking about a different place. We're talking about hundred. So, how do I find the nearest hundred? The first thing that you're going to do is you're going to go over to your fillable reference sheet and you're going to copy down the number. But please be careful when you're copying down the number. You can't just write it anywhere. We have 1205.10. I want you to start with the decimal. So the decimal is right here between the 5 and the 1. And you need to make sure that when you bring this number over to our reference sheet, the decimal point continues to be between the 5 and the 1. Right? So our number was 1205.10. 1205.10. I'm going to copy it down just like this so that the decimal is in the right spot. If by accident I wrote this number like this, 125, whoops, that's not even the right number, 1205.10, this would not work out. Please do not do this. Let's continue. The question asks us to take 1,205.10 and round it to the nearest hundred. So the first thing that we need to ask ourselves is what digit is in the hundreds place? So we're going to look at our help sheet and we can see here that hundreds is this guy right here. So that means that it is the 2 that is in our hundreds place. The 2 is what we are rounding. So going back to our booklet, we now know that we're rounding the 2. And from here on out, it's going to be the exact same as our first lesson on rounding money. We're rounding the 2, so we need to decide, are we rounding up or are we rounding down? We need help to make that decision. So we look at the digit after the 2, which is the 0. Since 0 is less than 5, I have that other sheet somewhere here. Right, please remember this help sheet as well. Since 0 is less than 5, we are going to round down. And that means that the 2 stays the same. So this is going to equal 1. The 2 stays the same. And everything after that 2 becomes a 0. So 1, 2, 0, 0, 0.00. If you want, you can get rid of all of the zeros after the decimal. You have to keep the ones before. So this number is 1,200 after we rounded. Please recall that when you round down, your number stays the same, but if we were to round up, like we will in the next example, the number will increase that we're rounding. So our next number is 3,780.99. I'm going to copy that over. 3,780.99. Remember, your decimal needs to be in the right spot. So put your number on this page so that the decimal matches up. Now again, we're rounding to the nearest hundred. So using our sheet, we can tell that it is the 7 that is in our hundred spot. So the 7 is what we are rounding. So I underline the 7 because I understand that's our hundreds place. We're rounding the 7, but I need help. I need help to decide if I'm rounding up or I'm rounding down. So I look to the next number to the right, the 8. And since 8 is larger than 5, we're rounding up, which means the 7 increases. So I rewrite the number. The 7 increases to an 8, and every number after is going to turn into a 0. I can choose to rewrite this, taking out the zeros after the decimal. My answer is 3,800. Next example, 9,450.42. Again, we're rounding to the nearest hundred, so we need to determine what number is the hundreds place value. 9450.42. So I'm going to copy this value into our help sheet. And again, this is really important. Make sure you do it correctly. The decimal needs to match up. So I'm actually going to start there. 0.42. Let's write that first. 0.42. And then before the decimal is 9450. So 9450, so that each spot has its own number. Since we're rounding to the hundreds, I know that it is the 4 which I am rounding because that is in the hundreds place. So I look at the 4 and I say I need help. And the 5 which comes after is going to help the 4 decide how to round. Our rounding rules tell us 5 means we round up. So it is the 4 which is going to round up. It is going to increase. So this is going to become 9,500.00. And again, we can remove some of those zeros, giving us 9,500. All right. Next example, we are going to round to the nearest tenth. Now, please remember that there is a difference between the tenth spot and the tens spot. Right? In our number above, our tenths is the 8 and our tens is the 6. So make sure that you're looking closely at the place value because it's easy to confuse them. So example 1 is 45.67. We need to find where the tenths is. And you can start by using this sheet until you get comfortable. 45.67. Let's draw that in. Making sure the decimal is in the right spot. Now, the tenths is going to be in this spot right here. Right? I look at the top. I look for the word tenths. And then I carry it down and I say, okay, this 6 is going to be my tenths. The tenths is the first number after your decimal. So this 6, the first number after my decimal, is what I am going to be rounding. I'm going to zoom in a little bit here. The 6 needs help deciding how to round, so it's going to look at the 7, and the 7 tells it to round up, because the 7 is greater than 5. So this is going to equal 45 point, the 6 goes up to a 7, and everything after becomes a 0. If you want, you can rewrite this as 45.7. Example B also asks us to round to the nearest tenth. Now, you can take this number over to your reference sheet and place it in there if you would like, but I hope at this point we're starting to get used to it, and at least for this question, we already know that the tenths are the first number after the decimal. So in this case, it's going to be the 1. We're rounding the 1, which is in the tenths spot. We look for help. The 2 tells us to round down because 2 is less than 5. So you rewrite everything as is, but when you get to the number that you're rounding, because we're rounding down, that means that it stays the same. And everything after becomes 0, which if you want, you can choose to leave out. Example C, again, we're rounding to the tenths, which is the first number after the decimal. We look for help. Now, the 5 can be a bit tricky, but if it is a 5, we still round up. Oh, that was already circled. That was silly of me. If it's a 5, we still round up. So the 7 is going to round up. It is going to become an 8. And everything after that 8 becomes 0, which you can choose to include or not. Up to you. Okay. Now, at this point, I want you to consider, if you're feeling comfortable with this, I want you to consider filling in the rest of the lesson on your own, pausing the video, and then coming back after you're done to check your answers with me, because I am going to pick up the pace a little bit, moving through the rest of the lesson. Example 3, we are going to round these numbers not to the nearest tenth, but to the nearest 10. What does that mean? Well, 984.25. I'm going to erase this so we can start fresh. $984.25 I write it in properly into my place value chart, and I find that the tens column is going to be 2 numbers to the left of the decimal. The 8 is in the tens place value, and the 8 is therefore what I'm going to be rounding. So I look at the 8. I need help deciding how to round. The 4 tells me to round down, since it is less than 5. So rounding down means that the 8 stays the same, and everything after the number that I rounded becomes a 0. Please remember, You can choose to drop the zeros only after the decimal. So the tens is the second number to the left of the decimal. In question B, that is going to be the first 6. We need help deciding how to round, so we look at the next number, also a 6, but it tells our first 6 in the tens slot to round up. So that's going to become a 7, and everything after the number we rounded becomes a 0. You can choose to drop the zeros only after the decimal. 1,455.78. The tens, which is the number that we're rounding to, is the second number to the left of the decimal, the 5. I need help deciding if we round up or round down, so we look to the number after, also a 5. Tells our first 5 to round up. So our numbers stay the same until we get to our tens, where we're rounding up. So that 5 becomes a 6, and everything after becomes a 0. You can choose to drop the zeros after the decimal. The last example of today's lesson, we're rounding to the nearest hundredth. Not hundreds, hundredth. So what does that mean? Well, let's copy our first example into our place value chart and see. 0.159. Well, our hundredths column is right here, which I am trying to highlight. There we go. Our hundredths column is highlighted at the top. And if we carry that down, it is our 5 that is in the hundredth spot. That is what we are rounding. The second number to the right of the decimal is our hundredths place. So, since this 5 is what we're rounding, it looks to the 9 for help on how to round. The 9 tells it to round up, so it becomes 0.160, which you can choose to write as 0.16. Example B, we're also rounding to the hundredth here. And just like the first question, the hundredth is going to be the second number after the decimal, the 3. The 3 looks for help. It looks to the 4, the number to the right. It asks it, do I round up or do I round down? Since the 4 is less than 5, it tells us to round down. So this is 3.03. Everything after becomes a 0. You can choose to drop that. Finally, 14.689, rounding to the nearest hundredth. That hundredth is the second number after the decimal, the 8. The 8 looks to the 9 for help. The 9 tells it to round up. So all of your numbers stay the same until the number you're rounding, that 8, rounds up to a 9. Everything after it becomes 0, which you can rewrite as 14.69. So that's our lesson for today. Hopefully it made sense. If it does not, please make sure that you're asking your teacher for help. And what you need to be doing now is jumping to the next page where you have practice with this work. Please remember to use your reference sheet to help you find the number that you need to round if you need that help. Thank you and have a great night.